He is getting heavily involved in gubernatorial politics, specifically. I'll go through his background a little bit here real quickly. He was born in Frankfurt, Germany. He spent some time growing up in South Africa, as we've mentioned, and then he moved to the United States. And he was a law clerk for the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. He was a speechwriter for Ronald Reagan's Secretary of Education. And in 98, he co-founded PayPal, was on the board until it sold to eBay. And he founded Palantir in 2004, a big data firm. The one I wanted to touch on was Palantir Gotham. This is a predictive policing system. It uses big data to determine when, where, and who will commit future crimes. It is used by police departments in the United States, such as the NYPD's Patronizer, it's called. It is also used by the Chinese Communist Party to identify potential Uyghur terrorists for assignments to re-education camps. And in 2004, Peter Thiel purchased 10% of Facebook before it exploded for $500,000. So, you know, when he talks big and tough about big tech, he's part of it. He's a big part of it, between Palantir and Facebook.
You know what the Palantir are, don't you?
No.
Okay, so the Palantirs were from Lord of the Rings. And they were they're called the Palantir. There were several of them, but they were the all-seeing eyes that Saruman and Sauron had, the globe that they could look into and see everywhere and keep an eye on everything all at once from one location. So, I mean, certainly nothing ominous at all about Sauron being able to see everything and keep control of.
And he has an estimated net worth currently of $6.92 billion. He's 410th on the Bloomberg Billionaires Index. So when people talk about Peter Thiel funding these research projects, this is what it is. It's Breakout Labs here. These are all centered around the medical industry, basically, and they're all trying to cash in on medical breakthroughs. Basically, is what it looks like to me. And people are speculating that he's trying to live forever here with this, with these investments, trying to invest in technologies that are going to lead to increased longevity for the human race, and probably him particularly is what he's interested in. I imagine.
Yeah, mostly him.
There is the SENS Foundation, headed by Aubrey de Grey.
Rather than trying to slow down those two arrows, the process where metabolism creates damage or the process where damage creates pathology, instead, we can separate the arrows from each other. We can go in and periodically repair the damage so that even though it's being created at the natural rate, nevertheless, it will not actually accumulate to the point where it's bad for you. And, of course, that's what we already do, coming back to my point that aging is a phenomenon of physics. It's what we already successfully do with simpler machines.
And his organization's idea that's funded by Peter Thiel, in large part, is to repair the body, attempting to repair the different aspects of damage as much as they're accumulated. So, essentially, to stop the aging process.
Yeah, I've actually listened to him on Rogan before. I guess, I don't know, this is all so beyond me, obviously, but is anyone else really picking up on this, like in the broader medical scientific community? Because, I don't know, I got the kind of feeling from him that he was a bit of a snake oil salesman himself, but...
Well, his whole contribution is the roadmap, right? The other people are the ones that are going to have to do all this stuff. Cell loss, cell atrophy, replace using stem cells, division-obsessed cells, so that's cancer, reinforce using telomere control. So some of these were probably really far out, right? Like telomere control for preventing cancer, yeah, that'd be great, but I'm sure people are working on it, but...
I don't know, I feel like I could have come up with this roadmap myself. Like, aging, make it stop. All right, you guys figure this out.
Well, he breaks it down a little bit, but in terms of like actual research to get this stuff done, he sounds like he's convinced that they're working on it and they're getting closer. But
this might be a hustle funded by a billionaire to get other billionaires that want to live for forever to contribute to the research so that Peter Thiel can catch up to his boy Elon Musk and not be 400 something on the billionaire list.
but we will also cover the Seasteading Institute again. We've talked about this before. This is headed by Patry Friedman, grandson of Milton Friedman.
Let's consider the evolution of today's dominant species of society that we live in, representative democracy. That evolution took a bloody revolution and an open frontier where the new society could grow up far away from its parents, who were not so supportive. But we've run out of frontier.
If only you could elect your parents. Wouldn't that be something?
All land is claimed, and our revolutions have become increasingly superficial. We're changing individual leaders. We're no longer creating new societies. From a social sense, it's like we're back in the age of the dinosaurs.
He's complaining about no more lands to conquer.
The world is full of these
interesting take.
Big, blundering country creatures.
I
and
complain about it too.
Space, there's no place
no more
for
land
new
to steal.
Evolutionary leaps to better ways for us to live together.
A good Thanksgiving message.
In some ways, this stability is wonderful. I don't trust 18th century societal DNA to handle the problems of the 21st century. But what can we do? Well, let's learn from this journey and return to where we began, the oceans. Join me for a moment in a thought experiment. Suppose that we could build here as cheaply as building here in San Francisco. Not that cheap, but doable. What would that enable? It would reopen the frontier so that pioneers with new notions for new nations could peacefully put them into practice. We could have evolution without revolution.
Sounds pretty good. What do you think?
I'm really fascinated with the idea. I like a lot of what he was talking about. I think the tools aren't there. You know, having a basically like a social network by which we could kind of organize or structure life that's truly democratic. I mean, Facebook is obviously it's not now because it's been corrupted. But let's say Facebook is what it was supposed to be, where it's you, me, everyone. We have our page, our voice to speak with, and we use that to communicate and to some extent figure out legislation and how we want to go about doing things. Obviously, the same thing with seasteading. Different experiments and experiments in different forms of government. I think it's great. It's awesome. The problem is, I imagine we're going to get to, when you have kind of nefarious people with ulterior motives pushing these ideas. But yeah, the idea of seasteading that as long as the money's taken out of the country at a number that people agree with, it's legitimately acceptable. Cool, go do it. But that's the problem with these things is they're not really experiments in democracy. They're experiments in hiding money.
Believe it or not, this has been tried. We have had our first seasteaders. This famous couple, Chad and Nadia, the first seasteaders. I watched this whole series. This is fascinating. I think you'll enjoy this. They're creating a new world, a new frontier, living the life.
So Ocean Builders is selling this oceanfront property at a fraction of the cost any other place you would get oceanfront property. So it's the fact that we're beginning something completely brand new. It's going to grow bigger and bigger. So the whole seasteading concept will be better governance. Your business will grow because you're actually in a system where there's smart.
Your business will grow because you're actually in a smart system.
Smart systems as opposed to all the gridlock and...
okay, he's just kind of giving the whole game away right there.
Have a monopoly on land, but they don't have a monopoly on sea. The fact that it takes the FDA, 5 years to approve a new drug that could save millions of people's lives, we don't need that.
He's on it, man. He's new frontier. Who needs the FDA? Just give me any random drug. Who cares? We don't need regulation.
The fact it takes the FDA to 5 years to get drugs that are saving people's lives. That's what the 5 years is about. We need to make sure it actually is saving people's lives and not making them grow extra arms, man.
What was it, thalidomide babies? Was that it? They were selling thalidomide unapproved, and it was causing terrible deformities in babies. They did is they drove this boat out here in the ocean, and they raised it up on this platform, and they just it's just kind of stuck there now. I mean, there's a lot of points I wanted to make about this. This is really dumb. They're using a diesel generator. They don't have electricity, obviously. If they have cell service, they're using some country's cell service that they're not paying taxes for. They're shipping in all their food and water, obviously, from a country, again, who they're not paying taxes for none of this stuff. There's subsidies for all this food to make the food cheap, and they're not contributing. They're kind of just...
freeloaders.
And I'm sure maybe it would be better if you had a whole community of these. I have no idea what the ecosystem implications are of having a bunch of the ocean covered up with, like, houseboats. I don't know. This was actually a movie. It was called Waterworld, and it didn't turn out so well for the humans. Like, living on boats isn't really that great, you know.
Kevin Costner's greatest movie.
Anyway, it seems like a lovely romantic time here, doesn't it? How does the story end, though?
Family and friends of Chad Elwertowski fear his life is on the line. He and his girlfriend are now on the run after Thai police officials accuse them of essentially trying to lay claim to Thai territory with their floating house.
It all of a sudden changed to where he became a fugitive. It was almost like you're reading something out of a movie.
My greatest fear is that he's going to end up killed through all this.
They were just living there. They didn't build it. They didn't buy it.
The Thai government claimed that he was trying to secede from Thailand, basically. He was off the coast of Thailand, like 25 nautical miles. And he's facing life in prison or a death sentence for this charge. So they are in hiding, like in Central America somewhere. They were making Facebook posts from Panama the last I checked. They haven't caught him. They did make it out of Thailand.
The Thai don't mess around with that stuff.
Apparently not.
You get caught with a joint, it's death sentence.
So the whole house, the whole seasteading thing didn't go that well the first time. But that was just a trial run, you know. So the next one will be better.
Fingers crossed.
Seasteading.org if you're interested, Tony. They'll sell you the houseboat thing and everything. They'll show you how to put it up.
Well, I don't need to do it on the sea. I'm not. I get motion sick real easy, so probably not for me.
I don't know if there's running water. I don't know. It's probably not the best place to live. So some of the people Peter Thiel is connected to. I'll play the clip and then I'll discuss it.
So one reason is obviously economic or structural. So you think of these areas, they're beset by these terrible economic trends built around industries like coal and steel that make it harder for folks to get ahead. That's certainly one problem. There's also the problem of brain drain, where the really talented people, because they can't find high-skill work at home, end up moving elsewhere. So they don't build a business or nonprofit where they're from. They end up going elsewhere and taking their talents with them.
See, those are both true, but those aren't the important things. The important thing's coming up. The reason the Rust Belt is so poor.
There are failing schools in a lot of these communities, failing to give kids the educational leg up that really makes it possible for kids to have opportunities later in life. These things are all important. I don't mean to discount these structural barriers, but when I look back at my life and at my community, something else was going on. Something else mattered. It's difficult to quantify, but it was no less real. So for starters, there was a very real sense of hopelessness in the community that I grew up in. There was a sense that kids had that their choices didn't matter. No matter what happened, no matter how hard they worked, no matter how hard they tried to get ahead, nothing good would happen. So that's a tough feeling to grow up around. That's a tough mindset to penetrate. And it leads sometimes to very conspiratorial places. So let's just take one political issue that's pretty hot, affirmative action. So depending on your politics, you might think that affirmative action is either a wise or an unwise way to promote diversity in the workplace or the classroom. But if you grow up in an area like this, you see affirmative action as a tool to hold people like you back. That's especially true if you're a member of the white working class. You see it as something that isn't just about good or bad policy. You see it as something that's actively conspiring, where people with political and financial power are working against you. And there are a lot of ways that you see that conspiracy against you, perceived, real, but it's there, and it warps expectations.
So, even though neoliberal policies have ravaged the Rust Belt, and there are no manufacturing left, it's all service industry, so it's really poor there now. All that's true, but the bigger issue are liberal policies like affirmative action warping people's expectations. They think they can't succeed, so therefore they can't. That's the problem. They just need to really believe that they can succeed, Tony.
So is that what he's saying? 'Cause I completely agree with that, everything he just said there. He's talking about perceptions, not what's actually happening. So, him talking about growing up in an area in the Rust Belt, there's an incredible sense of hopelessness. Like, I recognize that. I identify with that. I've seen that around me. I've felt that myself. You look around, you don't see the avenue out. And, it kind of gets to this Facebook conservatism or Facebook politics that I was talking about earlier. You're out there. It's people's eyes being drawn to the wrong thing. I mean, obviously there are other reasons that people are in these bad positions, but I have heard that from people. I have heard so many people, specifically with affirmative action, and they feel like, well, yeah, this is keeping me. All these black people are getting hired ahead of me, and these are policies to keep white people down, and you get all this conspiratorial thinking that goes into this. It kind of goes hand in hand with these policies, and it's harmful. I don't know how much good it's doing, but whether correct or not, and I think in most cases it's not correct. People have to realize that instituting these policies does cause a lot of harm. It does cause a lot of conspiratorial thinking, and it does cause a lot of strife, racial strife, I guess, in places like here in Kentucky. I mean, I've worked with these guys that have said this stuff. They didn't have any affirmative action where I worked at, but they certainly believed it happened there, and they certainly believed that they'd been negatively affected by it. So,
I would probably argue that it's not the affirmative action that's the problem. The problem is people like J.D. Vance pumping this shit up. That's what I would argue. But
yeah, no, I don't think affirmative action is the problem. I'm just agreeing with the sentiment that people think that it is.
Sure, yeah, I think that's fostered,
often.
J.D. Vance, he's super slick, dude. This is part of what's known as the Dark Enlightenment. I'm not sure if you've heard this one yet, but this is very interesting. J.D. Vance is a visiting fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and he is a founding investor in a right-wing YouTube competitor, Rumble. He is the Rumble guy, and he is heavily funded by Peter Thiel. The most interesting one of all, probably, Curtis Yarvin, a proponent of what he calls the Dark Enlightenment. This is a conspiracy theory, basically, that says the real rulers of the United States are a cabal of liberal universities and social media members called the Brahmin. Society is being eroded by progressive values like egalitarianism. Here is the man himself. He had this very influential blog some years ago. He goes by the name of Mencius Moldbug, but his real name is Curtis Yarvin. Here is a little bit of this charming fellow.
So, obviously, a very complicated problem. So, I like to simplify things. So, I've reduced this very complicated problem to a simple four-letter acronym, which is RAGE. And RAGE stands for Retire All Government Employees. Very, very, very simple. Now, the problem with this is, why have we never heard this before? Why has no one ever suggested, let's just get rid of this thing? To a substantial extent, it's because most people are operating under delusion that they do this every 4 years. They thought in 2008, hey, you recruited this government in 2008. And
people think
it was just the same. The reality is, as anyone who knows Washington knows, that the politicians you elect in these democratic elections are really entirely superfluous to the mechanism in Washington. They change things a little bit. It matters a little bit whether you vote for Democrats or Republicans, but basically, if the whole system were, the whole electoral system, all this, how a bill becomes a law, all this stuff we learned in 11th grade, all this appeared, Washington would go and running exactly as it's running now. So
it gets dark, dude. It's crazy how much influence this guy had, and still has. So his idea is to discard democracy in favor of technocracy, or rich, high-tech oligarchs, basically running the country. He contends that society needs a, quote, hard reset, or a, quote, rebooting, not a series of gradual political reforms. He wants to directly align property rights with political power, formally in what he calls, quote, formalism. And like I said, he's very influential in right-wing circles. He is read and admired by people like Steve Bannon, Patry Friedman, and Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel invested $100,000 in Yarvin's startup. This is Mencius Moldbug on Michael Malice's show.
Does it bother you how much contemporary conservatives are of the belief that the culture and the left has gotten more extreme, as they would say, or more in control of culture?
That's an interesting question. I don't know that it's ever not been in control of culture throughout our lives. And this is the point. The thing is that, conservatives, mainstream conservatives, DC conservatives have a very sort of, if you go back before Buckley, their history is completely made out of cardboard. And so,
but basically what he does in this is he cherry picks like very specific people throughout the early 1900s that were like left-wing communist members or Socialist Party members, and sort of tries to claim that they were the ones running the country back then, like even through McCarthyism somehow. It's very conspiratorial and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And he sort of reminds me of like Spoonie, if you know who that is. He's like a D&D person, like YouTuber, but he's very like LARPer, isn't he? Like,
the fact I was getting ready. He looks like he did a guest appearance on Friends in the 90s.
The fact that how's this guy so well respected? If you listen to him talk,
yeah,
it's insane,
he definitely has a fun noodle PVC sword somewhere in that house.
He's at the center of this dark Enlightenment, dude, with all these rich libertarians trying to fucking overthrow the government. And the fact that there's $6.92 billion worth of clout behind this dark Enlightenment is what's scary to me. Here's the man himself, Peter Thiel. This is his speech at the National Conservative Convention. Pay attention to his mannerism, dude. This guy's scary.
A very all-important question. Where do you sort of shift from the wisdom of crowds to the madness of crowds? Where do these things shift to becoming, a mob or a racket, or simply something that's...
He's talking about the government here.
Totalitarian lie. And there's sort of, in the philosophy of science, sort of the, one of the ways I think you can sort of frame it is that science always thinks of itself as fighting a two-front war against extreme skepticism and extreme dogmatism. So sort of the way it originated in the 17th and 18th century. So extreme skepticism, if I say, I don't believe the audience exists, can't trust my senses, you can't do science. Extreme dogmatism, the Aristotelian notion that the earth can't possibly move, that's probably also bad for science. And of course, in its 18th century version where the scientists style themselves as deists and rationalists and free thinkers of various types, it was always the fight against dogmatism that was what dominated. And in a very, I think, paradoxical turn, that is still, the way they think of themselves. Even though, if you sort of say where it's gotten unbalanced and erred, it has obviously just become massively on the side of dogmatism, not enough skepticism at all, you see this, of course, in all the genuflections to science with capital S. In this household, we believe in science. That's sort of an evidence that you don't, or just even just the assertion. I always think that when you have to call things science, they aren't, like climate science or political science. We don't use physical science or chemical science because You don't need to push it quite that hard. And
doesn't he seem a little schizophrenic or something? Like something's wrong with him?
Yeah, he's a little
fervent or something.
Well, fervent. That's the perfect word.
He acts like he's been reading Mencius Moldbug all day. He's worried the commie government's going to come get him.
If he didn't make billions, would he still be saying this?
I'm sure every billionaire thinks they deserve to be a billionaire, you know?
I think there's some credence to the idea that you get to that level of success, and obviously you're going to have political connections, and you've dealt with starting businesses aplenty and dealing with different regulations, and you probably have a lot more experience than someone like myself in understanding how bloated many of the bureaucracies are and how much nonsensical red tape and how inefficient things work, and even the corruption. You know, he's well aware that, hey, I could get this certain permit if I donated to this guy's political campaign.
If there's one person who has the most power over the government, it's Peter Thiel. He's a freaking billionaire. What is he complaining about the government for? He can do anything he wants. He could write his own legislation, I'm sure, if he wanted to, and just pay to have it enacted. I mean, what is he complaining about?
I don't know. I mean, maybe he honestly knows how the government works better than you or I, or he goes, hey, this is a broken system. I mean, it worked well for me. It worked well for me in this particular instance, but it is a broken system, and maybe we need to replace it with something. And so he goes one step, which is get rid of the broken system, and then just kind of ends it there and doesn't replace it with a better system.
They're not complaining about the fact that it's not democratic enough, what we would probably complain about with the government. They're complaining that it's too democratic and controlled by the Soviet Politburo or something.
Yeah, that's my understanding of who's in control of the EPA.
And the whole idea of retire all government employees, like he tries to claim that the government would go on exactly as it was without all the government employees. It's like, well, who's going to do all the stuff? Who's going to do the stuff that needs to be done? Like, what if you retire all the if all the postal employees are retired, who's going to deliver the mail? You know what I mean? Who's going to write the Social Security checks?
Just doesn't make sense on its face. He's saying like, well, okay, we get rid of it, but we keep the laws in effect or the basic function in effect. I mean, I don't know.
I think they just want to let Facebook write their own legislation. I think is what they want. They want a technocracy. He spells it out pretty plainly. Moldbug does in his blogs.
All I have to say to them is get on Facebook for a couple minutes, or anybody that thinks this is a good idea, just get on Facebook for 10 minutes and see how well thought. See if these are the people you want running your society.
How influential are these ideas in wealthy elite circles? Seems like they're pretty well ingrained, given the names involved, including former President Donald Trump as part of this dark Enlightenment. Here's another question. Is it possible for these guys to defend their property against the majority of the people? They had decided to expropriate, tax all this guy's wealth. Is there a way he can defend all that wealth?
I think we're getting to the point where we're going to start finding out very soon. I mean, the amount of wealth that such a small section of the society has amassed, like, yeah, I mean, and influence, wealth and influence. So obviously, Peter Thiel, he's still on the board of Facebook, I believe, right?
You could make an argument that the wealth isn't even a problem; it's really the influence, right? But
it's
you
the influence
could make that argument.
Wealth brings, yeah. I don't know. We might be seeing what private armies, what kind of propaganda he could spread to get people to join his private army to defend him against the evil communists that are trying to get him to pay for schools in his neighborhood.
See, I think you're right. I think that's the problem. He would be able to hire like a private army, and they would get paid very well compared to everybody else, right?
Yeah, literally. And I mean, and it's not even the pay. I mean, he's on the board of Facebook. People are so easily influenced, can be convinced of the dumbest crap if they read something on Facebook that their fucking aunt shared with them.
I already know, dude.
I mean, it's unreal.
Do your own research.
With the data that Alexa, bringing it back around, with the data that Alexa has stolen from everybody, they could create an algorithm that could convince people that he's the second coming of Christ, or I don't know, some crazy stuff, and then people would go there and fight for him for free. He wouldn't even have to use his billions to buy a private army.